Well, hey, howdy, hi. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by to join me today. I really do appreciate it. My name is Ellie, and I'm a witch, and this over here is my teaching assistant, Andy, and today is Monday, and on my channel that means it is Misheard History. Today's Misheard History topic is going to be the Battle and Massacre of Goliad. Like last week's video, we are once again going to be revisiting Texas. We're American Texas, to be fair, but let's go ahead and jump into the video. In 1835, Mexico operated two major garrisons within its Texas territory, the Alamo and Presidio La Bahia near Goliad. This presidio is often referred to as Fort Defiance. The Alamo being the political center of Texas, and Goliad was the halfway point between it and the port of Copano. Military and civilian supplies were sent by sea from Mexico to Copano Bay and then transported into Texas settlements. In early 1835, the Mexican government was transitioning from a federalist model to centralism. The Texas colonists were wary of the change and began forming committees of correspondence and safety. The Central Committee was in San Felipe de Austin, and they were coordinating group activities. Texans staged a minor revolt in June against customs duties. These disturbances prompted Mexican President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna to send troops to Texas. Colonel Nicholas Condell led 200 men to reinforce Presidio La Bahia in July. Santa Anna feared that stronger measures would be needed to quell any unrest and ordered his brother-in-law, General Martin Perfecto de Cos, to repress with strong arm all those who, forgetting their duty to the nation which has adopted them as her children, are pushing forward with a desire to live at their own option without subjection to the laws. Cos landed at Copano Bay in September with about 500 soldiers in tow. He began by touring the port and a small garrison at Refugio, leaving small groups of soldiers to reinforce these locations. The rest of the soldiers arrived in Goliad on October 2nd. What Cos and his soldiers didn't know was that the colonists were preparing. A few days before Cos's arrival, Texans, including James Fannin, Philip DeMitt, and John Lynn, were advocating for a plan to seize Cos at either Copano or Goliad. As soon as Cos was spotted approaching Copano Bay, colonists in Refugio sent messengers to San Felipe de Austin and Matagorda to inform other settlements of the arrival. Concerned that a lack of weaponry would make the presidio at Goliad impossible to capture, the Central Committee chose not to order an assault. Even though Fannin, DeMitt, and Lynn were still continuing to push for an attack on Goliad, Texan attention was shifting towards Gonzales, where a group of Texans were refusing to obey orders from Ugartetrilla. On August 2nd, the Battle of Gonzales kicked off the Texas Revolution. Texans were victorious, and upon hearing this, Cos made haste for Bear on October 5th. He had most of his soldiers, but due to a lack of transportation, most of their supplies had remained at La Bahia. On October 6th, the members of the Texan militia in Matagorda met at the home of Sylvanus Hatch. First order of business was to elect a captain, and that was George Collinsworth, with Dr. William Carleton as first lieutenant and D.C. Collinsworth as second lieutenant. The men then decided to march on La Bahia. The goal was to kidnap Cos and to steal the $50,000 that was rumored to be with him. By that afternoon, 50 Texans were ready to leave from Matagorda. Along the way, the group fired Carleton for unknown reasons and appointed James W. Moore in his place. The next day, the expedition stopped at Victoria, and they were joined by English-speaking settlers from other settlements, as well as 30 Tejanos. For those who don't know, they are Mexican descendants, and this term is most commonly used to describe Texans of Mexican descent. No official reports were kept, but historian Stephen Hardin estimated that the Texan ranks were around 125 men. 49 of those men signed a contract of volunteers under Collinsworth on October 9th, pledging their loyalty to the Mexican federal government and would do no harm to those who remained loyal to the Federalist cause. Summit received a missive from a customs agent in Goliad with news that Cos had already left La Bahia and was heading to San Antonio de Bexar. The group was undeterred and marched out on October 9th, halting 1 mile outside of Goliad. Now, the following events are not clear. According to the memoirs of Mexican General Vicente Filasola, who was not actually in Texas in 1935, the Texans plotted to draw the Presidio commander, Colonel Juan Lopez Sandoval, and his officers from the fort. The Texans allegedly planned a dance in Goliad on the 9th and invited the Mexican officers. Sandoval, Captain Manuel Sobrio, and Lieutenant Jesus de la Garza briefly joined the dance, but they were suspicious and returned to the fort. Notably, there are no Texan accounts that support this event. What is supported is that DeMitt and several other Texans did enter town that evening to try and find support for their cause. The effort was actually successful, and several local Tejanos joined the Texan force. They reported that Sandoval only commanded 50 men, which was far less than the number necessary to defend the entire perimeter of the fort, and they provided directions to the fort. Now, the main body of the Texan soldiers under direction of Collinsworth became disoriented in the dark and wandered from the road. They then became entangled in a mesquite thicket. Working their way back towards the road, they met Ben Millam, a colonist who had recently escaped the prison in Monterey. Millam joined the militia as a private, and the group was able to rejoin the vanguard. As the combined Texan forces prepared for battle, they sent a messenger to instruct the magistrate of the city to surrender. At 11 p.m. there came a response that the town would remain neutral, refusing to surrender or fight. Several citizens supplied access to the militia, though. The Texans divided themselves into 4 groups, each assigned a different approach to the Presidio. In the pre-dawn hours of October 10th, the attack began. The sentinel managed to sound the alarm before being shot. The Texans made quick work of kicking down the door on the north wall and running into the interior courtyard. The Mexican soldiers quickly lined the walls to defend the fortress. The Mexican soldiers opened fire, hitting Samuel McCulloch Jr. in the shoulder. The Texans returned fire for about 30 minutes. There was a pause in the fighting where a Texan spokesman yelled out that they would massacre every one of you unless you come out immediately and surrender. The Mexican garrison immediately surrendered. This was not the end by any means, though. The Goliad massacre occurred on March 27, 1836, following the Battle of Refugio and the Battle of Goliad, so we have to jump ahead several months to the start of 1836. Santa Anna learned that a group of Texas rebels were headed towards Matamoros, so he sent General Urrea to march along the coast to stop them. Arriving in Matamoros, he worked to secure cooperation from the locals on January 31, 1836. At the same time, General Sam Houston had persuaded all but about 70 to 100 men and their leaders to give up on their expedition and instead defend locations in Texas, namely Goliad. On February 12th, Fannin took most of his men to defend Presidio La Bahia. February 16th, Urrea crossed the Rio Grande with 188 cavalry and 205 infantry. He was able to recruit about 200 Tejano volunteers from the area, some of which had previously been sympathetic to the Texans. At 3 a.m. on February 27th, Urrea's patrolmen with a group of about 45 men began the Battle of San Patricio. Urrea's group killed 16 men and took 24 prisoners. Several men escaped into the darkness, though, and rejoined Fannin's command at Goliad. This small group said that all the prisoners were executed, which was untrue. But the news caused Fannin to stop efforts to send relief to the Alamo, and instead they prepared Goliad for the defense against the advancing Mexican army. On March 6th, the Mexican force under Santa Anna stormed the Alamo and killed the garrison. On March 14th, Colonel William Ward and 200 men, who had just helped evacuate colonists at Refugio, were surrounded by Urrea's force. Ward and his men fled into the night, but the Mexicans overtook part of Ward's force, killing 18 and capturing 31. Urrea was able to capture a messenger a couple days later. He was carrying dispatches that told of Fannin's plan to wait at Goliad and retreat once Ward and the others returned. In response, Urrea executed 30 prisoners he decided were mercenaries, and freed more than 20 others that he determined to be colonists or Mexican. He did so as not to be hindered by prisoners during the advance on Fannin's force. On March 19th, Urrea had quickly advanced and surrounded 300 men of the Texan army on the open prairie near Goliad. The 2-day Battle of Coleto ensued, and the Texans held their own for the first day. The Mexicans, though, received overwhelming reinforcements and heavy artillery. Fannin and the majority of the men voted to surrender on March 20th. They were led to believe that they would be paroled and released. They were returned to the fort at Goliad, but this time it was their prison. Albert Clinton Horton and his company, who had been acting as rear guard for Fannin, were chased off, but 18 men were captured and marched back to Goliad. 75 soldiers under William Parsons Miller and the Nashville Battalion were captured on March 20th and marched back to Goliad on March 23rd. On March 22nd, William Ward and the Georgia Battalion, 81 men, surrendered. Of those 81, 26 were kept in Victoria to work as laborers, but 55 were marched to Goliad on March 25th. The Mexicans took the Texans back to Goliad, and they were kept prisoner. The Texans were under the impression that they would be set free in a few weeks. Urrea left Goliad, leaving Colonel Jose Nicolas de la Portilla in command. Urrea wrote to Santa Anna to ask for clemency for the Texans. However, the response is not what he had hoped for. Santa Anna had pushed for a decree that had been passed by Congress on December 30th, 1835, stating that armed foreigners taken in combat were to be treated as pirates and executed. Santa Anna repeatedly ordered Uría to comply with the law and execute the prisoners. Portilla also received an order on March 26, who decided it was his duty to comply, despite receiving an opposing order from Uría that same day. On March 27, 1836, Portilla had between 425 to 445 Texans march from Goliad. The sick and injured stayed in the chapel. Those who did march were told they were out to gather wood and other supplies, believing they would be freed soon. They were turned away from the Mexican soldiers and shot point blank. Wounded survivors were clubbed or knifed to death. The sick and injured in the chapel were shot in their beds. Fannin was the last to be executed after watching his men die. He was taken to the courtyard in front of the chapel, blindfolded and seated in a chair. He made 3 requests. His personal belongings be sent to his family, to be shot in the heart and not the face, and to be given a Christian burial. The soldiers took his belongings, shot him in the face, and buried his body with all the other Texans killed that day. The entire Texan force was killed, save 28 men who feigned death to escape. Among those men was Herman Ehrenberg, who later wrote of an account of the massacre. William Lockhart survived despite being stabbed and clubbed. 4 members of Shackleford's Red Rovers, Dylan Cooper, Zachariah S. Brooks, Wilson Simpson, and Isaac D. Hamilton, all of whom escaped after days on the run. Thanks to the intervention of Francita Alves, also known as the Angel of Goliad, 20 men were spared to act as doctors, interpreters, or workers. Also spared were 75 soldiers of the Nashville Battalion. They later marched to Matamoros. The men spared were given white armbands, and as long as they wore them, they could walk freely. They were advised to not take the bands off, as Mexican soldiers were hunting for escaped Texans from Toledo, Victoria, and the massacre itself. And that is all that I have for you today. This one, I don't know why, but like it really got me. Like reading it kind of had me choked up, and then trying to tell you guys about them being shot and then Fannin, that whole thing. I almost kind of started crying, and I don't consider myself that emotional of a person, but I don't know what it is about that. It might be just that they were fighting for something they cared about and that mattered, and it was all for nothing, essentially. But yeah, I think that this was an interesting one. I had never heard about it, I had never learned about it in school, but it just is the other Alamo, and it's forgotten in history, and so it was really interesting to read about something I had never even caught a little bit of wind of, and I know people who live in Texas. I've seen the whole Riverwalk at the Rio Grande and all that. Seen the Alamo in Texas, but never heard about this one, and I think that's really interesting, and I hate that there's so much of history that we don't learn about. But with that being said, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys have any weird, unknown, lesser known, kind of forgotten history, any topic like that, please let me know. I want to like look more into that stuff, because I like the mainstream history and that kind of stuff, but I love the older stuff too, the stuff that you don't know about. There may not be a ton of information on it, but I still want to get like all the information possible, and if I can compile it so that other people can learn about it too, all the better. But yeah, so last thing, I was streaming last week. It was super fun. No idea if anybody really joined me. I don't have viewer count up, but I had a lot of fun, and I'm going to upload the VODs somewhere. I might do it on this channel. I might create a specific channel for like that gaming stuff. But yeah, it was super fun. I'm gonna stream this week, Thursday or Friday. Might be noon Eastern Standard Time. It might be a little bit later, more like 7-ish, later in the afternoon, maybe playing something spooky. I don't know. If anybody wanted to join me for that, my Twitch is in the description box down below. But next week, I will be doing more chilling encounters, so anecdotes and stories from people who have encountered cryptids, mythological creatures, etc. No idea what I'm doing next Monday for history or tea time and true crime. I'm getting really bad about not knowing what I'm talking about for the following week, so I apologize. I am working on 2 different projects right now. One would be the next Reading Nook video. That script is taking a little bit, so still working on that. Then the other one is about the 7 wonders of the ancient world. All of those, it's one of my favorite periods of history, and I love the 7 wonders of the world now and then, so I might do like a little bit of a comparison and so you guys know what they were, what they are, and kind of how that's decided. I'm also working on a video to explain these maps and kind of just give you like a little map tour as well as the rest of my wall. I don't do short form content, and so it's a little bit weird to try and do that. So I'm working on it very, very slowly, but surely I'm gonna try to get some more videos up, short form content wise. But yeah, I don't want to take up any more of your guys' time. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye!